Today we're going to take a look at this. It is the Philips Baristina. For £299 you get an espresso machine with a built-in grinder, kind of that modern blend of the bean to cup, but the traditional all-in-one. This was very heavily requested by a bunch of people who wanted me to take a look at this. I did not expect to find the things that I found here. Buckle up. Rather than walk you through each feature individually, I think what I should do is just make some coffee. That'll get us all on the same page at the same starting point for our journey today. As we look at this thing, it's pretty simple. There's a water tank at the back. There's a hopper for beans, with beans in it. There's a portafilter here. You'll notice this is obviously a kind of custom portafilter with some features on there. We'll discuss those, don't worry. And then some buttons on top here. Now, the buttons choose which sort of size coffee you would like. I would like a little espresso coffee. And then there's a button for like, give me more beans in my brew. So essentially up the dose, a stronger dose. Let's treat ourselves, let's do that. To make this thing work, what you do is you put the portafilter in and you slide it across. And that's party trick time. Ho, ho, ho. Could it be any easier to make a coffee? So simple. Now, if you look at how Philips sell this machine, they use the tagline, I think, love real espresso, hate the hassle. Well, this is the answer to your questions. And that is, as these things go, a hassle-free experience. I don't really know why they made it sort of do the thing where it puts itself back into position for me. I suppose it's appreciated, but kind of fun. I guess a little bit of fun. Who's angry about a little bit of fun? Certainly not me. Now, watching this brew, you might have thought, oh, you've not dialed that in, have you? It brewed a little quick. How does it taste? Not ideal. Now, it doesn't taste as bad as you might think because this uses what's called a pressurized portafilter. If you're not familiar with those, they look like normal portafilter. We've got a sort of metal basket that the coffee goes in, lots of fine holes at the bottom to filter out the grounds as the liquid passes through it. But here, after those holes, you have a single tiny hole that kind of creates artificial back pressure because the grounds often are too coarse and so they can't build the pressure you might want for an espresso style extraction. Pressurized portafilters in many machines can just be sort of switched out. The basket can come out and a proper basket can go in. This case, it can't. It's sort of baked into the design of the whole portafilter and it's a completely custom portafilter to this machine. So it's a little less sour than you would expect from a shot that brewed a little bit too fast, right? Like that's your thought is, oh, this should be like enamel removing sourness. This is quite a lighter end of medium style espresso roast. This should hurt, you know what I mean? But it doesn't. But I'm not saying that it's dialed in. So we should dial it in, right? We want to understand that if you have a grinder, one of the delights of the grinder is that you get to grind the coffee fresh. You get maximum freshness from your coffee beans, as is the case here. But the real win of the grinder is that you can grind appropriately for each coffee and each brew method. So if you put a very dark roasted coffee in, that would need a different grind setting than, say, a lighter roasted coffee. How do we adjust the grinder here? You can't. You just can't. Well, you can, I suppose, if you're willing to void your warranty to get inside this thing. I watched someone do a teardown of one of these, and they got to the bit where you could theoretically adjust the grinder a very small amount. But Philips have decided that you do not need to adjust your grind setting. Too much hassle. You don't want the hassle, you want real espresso. But that isn't going to let you have real espresso. Now, this is one of a number of very strange design decisions inside this coffee machine. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a second and some of the other ones that kind of make me scratch my head. But as a singular decision, this is kind of shocking to me. Now, Philips have made coffee machines before. They have made bean to cup machines, sort of super autos that sit on your counter. You push a button, coffee comes out the little spouts. They make pod machines. They have their own Sensio pods. The thing that wrecks my brain is that if you come from the world of bean to cups, you would know that one of the problems with a traditional bean to cup machine is that properly ground espresso coffee that is quite fine is very hard to move around inside the machine. You need to move it from the grinder to the brew chamber. You need to knock it out, get it clean again, move it back to the grinder, to the brew chamber. That cycle of movement with very finely ground coffee tends to fail. And so most bean to cup machines that you can buy, pretty much all, don't really grind super fine and don't let you grind that fine, even if you want to and even if you can adjust the grind setting. We covered all of this in quite a lot of depth in some videos about those. I will leave a link to those in the description down below. I'm going to credit Breville Sage with the big innovation, which was this kind of a thing, where they're like, hang on a second, if the problem is moving the coffee around, why don't we just get the human to do it? We can give the human a portafilter and they'll feel like they're making proper coffee, and we can have a grinder and we can tamp for them, and all they can do is move the coffee around for us and we'll brew it and the machine will control all the stuff, and we can use properly ground coffee. We can get real espresso, and people liked that. That style of machine with the built-in grinder with the portafilter is very popular, very easy to use, easy to recommend from my point of view, right? Like they can make really tasty coffee because they can do all of the things. Philips took the opportunity of having the human move stuff around half the time. You move it this way, I suppose, and you knock it out, but they move it a little bit too. They won't let go. But they didn't sort of use the unlock of letting you have finely ground coffee. Properly finely ground coffee. Even with a pressurized portafilter, that doesn't undo the challenge of coffee that's ground too coarse. It just makes the result taste less bad. If you own one of these, you know, you may not have terrible tasting coffee, but it will be less interesting than you want it to be. And if you're buying good coffee, you're not getting the best out of it. End of story. And that hurts me inside, because if you spent your good, hard-earned money on good coffee, you deserve to drink the good coffee and enjoy it. And we get to a point where I sort of feel like I just don't understand what Philips are thinking. It's like you've said to them, hey, Philips, I want to grind my own coffee, I want real espresso, and Philips have said, no, you don't. You don't want that. What you want is coffee in comparable strength and style to a pod, but technically flawed in comparison. You want the appearance of ease, but actually quite a lot of frustration and irritation and loss of quality as well with that. It just doesn't make sense why they would make this machine. The decisions get a little weirder. I'll get into some of this sort of extraction science in a second. Let me just get rid of this. Now, this portafilter comes with a little button. You see a little button? It's very exciting, isn't it? What could the button do? Well, the button kind of lifts up this sort of base basket piece. It's very strange. I'll show you in a second without any coffee in there. Theoretically, to help you knock it out more easily. So, but it doesn't knock it out more easily. You don't need to use, the button does nothing. I don't really understand why they put the button in here. The button does absolutely nothing. But, you know, it's a point of failure, I guess. Anyway, I'm going to knock it out and clean it. They argue you just need to rinse it in the sink, which is great if you want it to be nice and cold, which is not going to be the one thing that ruins the espresso, to be honest. So I guess they have a point. So it's not just the grinder on this machine that is kind of weird and produces some weird extraction stuff. It's also the way that the machine brews. Now, to show you how it brews, we have to trick the machine, which is a little bit annoying. We have to tell it to brew coffee and then have to get the portafilter out of the way so you can see how the brewing group works, because their promise is this grinds, it tamps, it brews. Two of those things are true. The way this thing works is that as you slot it across and you engage the grinding situation, it'll dump some ground coffee in there. With the up-dosed button, we tend to get about 10 grams of coffee from a sort of medium-ish roast. When it then comes back, actually the brew head lowers to sort of compress the coffee. It doesn't really tamp it though. Like if you interrupt this process, it's pretty soft and squishy. It's not properly compacted. And it knows how much coffee, because it's in charge, right? I don't understand how, even at the higher dose, it doesn't know to push harder in. Anyway, once the brew head is down though, the way the water enters was unexpected. This takes a little trial and error. I've got to get the portafilter out before it starts brewing, but when it thinks the portafilter is there, because there's a little, I assume, magnet in here engaging something so it knows what's going on. So let's have a go. Yeah, there it goes. Why would you do that? Let me just clean up. That is a fascinating design decision from my point of view. Before I say it's wrong, What I will say is, one, almost every single espresso machine I've ever used takes a very different approach, where generally speaking, you have a dispersion block above the coffee where water comes in from a single tube and is slowly dispersed initially through a block into sort of multiple streams, then again through a shower head to try and make sure that the water is spread as evenly as possible over the bed of coffee to get an even extraction. That's generally the goal. We want all of the coffee to give up the same amount of flavour. That tends to taste better than some of it giving a lot more and some of it giving a lot less. But maybe they knew something I didn't. I had a hunch that this was not going to be a good idea, but maybe they had found something I hadn't found out. What we did post-extraction is take a spent puck and pull 5 grams of the sort of wet used coffee from the center of the puck, from the middle, and we took 5 grams from the edge. What we then did is put that into some hot water in a magnetic stirrer. We stirred it for 5 minutes to try and extract as much as possible from the spent coffee grounds. What we found is that we could extract about 10% more from the grounds in the middle than the grounds at the edge. The suggestion being that where the water is entering, around the edge, is where most of the extraction is happening. From a taste perspective, that's undesirable. We want evenness through the whole cake. We want no channels. We want no rings, kind of like a donut of extraction happening. And actually, if I pull this next shot into a shot glass and we maybe shoot a little slow on the frame rates, the first liquid that comes out when you brew an espresso is not what I want to see when I make a traditional espresso. The first liquid from a great espresso, that first gooey, heavy, honeyed, thick espresso that falls into your cup, that is just like, it's the good stuff. It's the good stuff. It looks good. It's full of flavor. Don't drink it on its own. It's not balanced or fun, but it looks amazing. Let me make a coffee. Weird, right? Like the first liquid out, watery, coffee-colored, and eventually crema appears. I guess once it's built enough pressure, I guess once the puck's expanded enough to provide some resistance. But that's not, to me, ideal brewing. Now you can see that during that last shot, it dumped a little bit of coffee out, just randomly here. That happens from time to time. It can be a little bit messy. It's also annoying that the drip tray is sized so that it is messy enough to sort of half land on the drip tray and not really be wipeable. I'm getting very particular in my gripes. But anyway, looking at this ground coffee, feeling this ground coffee, we should talk about the ground coffee a little bit more on a technical level, because that's how we live our lives. So let's get some ground. I'm just going to pour it out on the bench because that way we can have a little look here. That is coarsely ground coffee. It's shockingly coarse to me. When we did extraction measurements, which is a thing we can do, we can use refractometers, we can look at the extracted liquid coffee, we can look at how much coffee we started with, how much extract we have, we can do some maths and know how much of the ground coffee we extracted. Generally speaking, 20% is considered a kind of benchmark of desirability. Here, at a ratio that's pretty high, so you've got 10 grams of coffee to 40 grams of liquid, and I will say, in its favour, pretty reliable at producing 40 grams of liquid. Like really pretty shockingly good at that. That's by the by. Your extraction was pretty low. We couldn't really get much past 16%. That generally tastes bad in a normal espresso machine. With a pressurized portafilter, it tastes a little bit less bad, but that is pretty low. And part of us wondered, well, is it just designed for really dark roasted coffee? So we put some really dark roasted coffee in and the result is the same. It's still like a 16% extraction, which is very low considering the very long ratio. Like traditional espresso, it might be 1 to 2 as a ratio of grounds to liquid, maybe 1 to 2.5. 1 to 4 is considered a lungo. This has a separate function that it calls the lungo, which we're not going to talk about that today. It's not going to be helpful for me to talk about that. So we're not going to talk about it. This grind setting is not changeable. This is it. For every single coffee, it's very coarse. How coarse is it? Well, I'll do a quick comparison. I'll get some espresso ground coffee and put it next to it and you can just see. That's a long way out. In fact, I looked at this and I was like, how does that compare to how we might grind coffee to brew a pour over? A pour over. And so what we did, we got our particle size analyzer out and I will show you the chart comparison. And you will see that the grind setting that we use for a 1 cup pour over is finer and much more uniform than the coffee this thing produces for espresso. So this is a volume distribution here, so you can sort of see where most of the volume of the pieces is. And then you can look at a surface area distribution, and you'll see that this thing does still produce plenty of fine pieces, but so many large pieces with it. Like, this is very coarse and very uneven. It is a bluntly low quality of grind of coffee. And I know I compared this to pods earlier on. I'm not a huge proponent of pods, but I have to accept that they are technically excellent. They grind the coffee in a way that you get really great extractions, typically 21, 22, 23%. They taste like the coffee you put in. And if you buy that coffee with your hard-earned money, you're getting your value out of the coffee itself. Whether it's worth it is up to you. That's a separate question. But technically, this is horribly flawed. And that's very frustrating. There are a pair of flat burr grinders in here, but they are ceramic. As I said, you can barely adjust them. If you're willing to take the machine literally to pieces, you can access this and slightly tweak it, but really you cannot produce a proper grind. And even if you could, this doesn't work that well with a pressurized portafilter anyway. And actually, there's a function here that lets you put in what they call kind of like a decaf function, where you might have some pre-ground coffee. You can load in and push and hold the middle button, and it will brew without grinding first. So if you put properly ground coffee in here, it still doesn't do a very good job extracting it because of the weird water distribution going on inside it and the weird pressurized portafilter. So not only is the grinder technically flawed, the portafilter is technically flawed. And if your goal is very bland, inoffensive, but not very good coffee, that's, I suppose, delivering on that. But if you dare to sell this with the line, "Love real espresso," that makes me a little bit cross. What makes me sad is that I know that talented people would have worked on this. There will be talented engineers who were given a brief, and they probably met the brief, but I don't really understand the brief. And what makes me even sadder is that I don't think it would cost that much more to have this have a proper set of burrs with a proper motor attached to it and some method of grind adjustment, and a proper portafilter, which does not cost more than a pressurized one. If you had that, the sort of science of espresso, the brewing process is not that complicated. We've proven that in the past, because if you put, say, a £50 cheap Aldi espresso machine next to a semi-competent grinder, you can have tasty espresso. Espresso machines heat water up and they push it forwards, ideally through a shower head onto a bed of coffee that is filtered through a basket, and the extract comes out. The quality is the beans, the water, and the grind size being appropriate to give up enough surface area, to give up enough flavour that your drink tastes nice. That's kind of it. And at £300, granted it's $250 most of the time, but at £300, that appears cheap in some ways, because it's a grinder and an espresso machine all in one. No steaming, of course, but it's those two things. It appears cheap. It is terrible value for money. And I made a video about Aldi doing a similar machine a number of years ago. People got very mad about that because I wasn't clear enough that because it is cheap, it's bad value for money. It's worth saving a little bit more, investing a little bit more, but actually not that much more. You could take that £50 machine we reviewed and put it next to a DF54, a Baratza ESP, and have a cheaper setup, I think, that makes better coffee. You'd have to do a little bit of work and you'd have to inject a little bit of care. But if you don't really care, but you'd like to care a little bit, which is, I guess, what this is aimed for, that you don't want to get into being a barista and making coffee, but you'd like access to better coffee at home, this is not the right tool. Philips don't ultimately believe that's what you want. They don't believe you want to get the best out of the coffee you're buying. Here's the sort of final point I want to make. I think coffee has changed around the world. Delicious coffee is very available now, online, in cafes, everywhere. We understand more about the brewing science, we understand more about technology, prices have come down, grinders have gotten good and cheap, espresso machines have gotten good and cheap. I don't think this meets the minimum entry bar anymore. I don't think this makes the minimum acceptable level of coffee quality. 10 years ago, I don't think I could make that argument. But today, it's just not good enough, as far as I'm concerned, for where the market is, where people's expectations deserve to be. The kind of quality they deserve to be drinking at home should they want to, and should they have £300 to invest in their home setup. I think what's interesting about the future is that I think a lot of bean to cups are kind of at the cusp of that too. And there's a big opportunity for someone to use technology to solve the bean to cup problem a little bit more, where people can just push a button and have a better experience, to really kind of explode that market and change it for the better. The way that we've seen espresso grinders at home explode in quality and drop in price. So bean to cups feel like the next target in a funny sort of way, because they're right at the line for those technical reasons that we mentioned earlier. I'm not saying if you like bean to cup coffee, you're wrong. I'm saying that if you like bean to cup coffee, well, it could be better, and it's not your fault that it's not, especially if you're buying nice coffee. And I think it's exciting that the future should hold some pretty decent leaps in the ease and quality of the coffee that you drink every morning. Now, quick thank you to Patreon. They give me huge freedom. They give me a budget each month to buy things. I bought this, full price. I don't owe Philips anything. They didn't lend me a unit. They didn't give me a unit. We bought this, and we can give you an unfiltered and honest opinion. I'm grateful to them for supporting the channel the way that they do. And secondly, I have a quick announcement. It's very exciting. If you'll just indulge me for 1 second. This is issue 2 of Cherry Bones. Cherry Bones, if you're not familiar, is a magazine that we publish here. It's no advertising, it's just brilliant creative work. It's about coffee, but not in the way that most magazines are about coffee. This takes you to fascinating and unexpected places, like prison, or Vietnam, to talk about durian, or opium, or cycling up an enormous climb in Colombia. Anyway, there's some amazing work in here. Our goal is to pay our artists, writers, collaborators properly, and just charge an appropriate price for the magazine. There's a limited run of these each time. Issue 1 sold out really quickly. Issue 2 is available now. Some stock is in the US, shipping from within the US, and some stock ships from the UK to pretty much everywhere else but the US. If you want to know more, there's a link in the description. If you pick it up, I hope you really, really enjoy it. I have a strong suspicion that you will. Now, obviously, I have a single experience with a single machine. There are lots of these out there in the world. I'd love to hear from you around your experiences with it. If you love it, I do want to hear from you. Are you having a better time than me? Have you had issues? Have there been challenges? I'm aware that, there have been some repeated issues across units with reliability, but just tell us your experience with it. Were you tempted by this? What's the deal? If you think I missed something, let me know down in the comments below. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great day.